The insurance and finance trigger. While dock crews watch drafts, a quieter clock starts ticking in offices with no windows on the river. Underwriters refresh models and ask dull questions that move billions. What if the wedge lasts 90 days instead of 30? How many days closed before a port's debt coverage ratio wobbles? What happens to a refinery's cooling systems if chloride spikes 5 times in a season? They don't need sirens to make changes. They need trend lines. Models now carry 3 tails: capture at old river, levee or floodway failures that force prolonged closures, and salinity intrusions that shut municipal intakes and trip industrial thresholds. The first is low probability, high severity. The second is becoming more frequent. The third is already operational. Reinsurers, who back the insurers, hate clusters. 2 drought years in a row looks like a cluster, not a blip. Premiums step up, deductibles stretch, exclusions multiply in the fine print. A Port Authority CFO flips to a slide labeled throughput risk. Bond covenants assume a baseline of open days. Add 10 more days closed and the coverage cushion thins. Add 20 and watch lists appear. The debt markets don't yell, they demand more interest quietly. A banker says, show me redundancy, alternate intakes, stockpile dredge funds, contingency contracts. The port promises studies. The rating committee marks outlook negative if the answers are vague. Farm credit officers sit across from producers and look past this harvest. Storage filled last season when barge slots vanished. Carry costs bit, basis blew out. If it happens again, operating lines stretch then fray. They ask about bins, hedges, rail access and debt service. It sounds personal, but it's systemic. River risk moving into the cost of money. A weak barge year can now echo through seed purchases and equipment notes a season later. This decision would haunt them shows up as a line item. Deferred resilience projects, intake extensions, cross-parish water ties, backup pumps, higher freeboards were cheaper 5 years ago. Now they cost more and lenders price the delay. A bond prospectus notes planned capital for water security. If it's unfunded, the cost of capital rises to match the hazard. If it's funded, the rate still reflects the river's new variance. Either way, the market loads the dice. Reinsurers send signals first. A European firm trims Gulf exposure on industrial interruption tied to navigation days. Another adds a parameter. Salinity-induced business interruption is no longer bundled with storm surge. It's its own peril with its own deductible. A third requires clients to maintain a minimum of alternative intake capacity to keep coverage. None of this is a press conference. It's an email that changes a budget. Municipal water systems feel it fastest. A parish renews its property and casualty policy and finds a new exclusion. Corrosion from chloride over threshold is not covered unless mitigation assets are in place. The board meets, balks at the premium, then looks at the map of the wedge's last push. A bond advisor clears her throat and says, rates up now or far more later. Ratepayers pay either way, the only question is when. Unknown to them, across town, a private equity team screens a midstream deal on the lower Mississippi. The model used to assume navigation days as a constant. Now the diligence packet includes a heat map of draft restrictions by month, a curve for emergency dredge availability, and a scenario where ORCS is offline for 30 days due to a near miss. The discount rate fattened by 50 basis points quietly kills the deal. The seller hears market conditions. Insurers like metrics they can price. Days closed, draft days below X feet, salinity miles upstream, and emergency sill height become KPIs. A port that reports them transparently and shows a plan gets a slightly better rate. A parish that waits for the Corps to build a sill each time pays more. A plant that hardens intakes and keeps a barge-mounted pump on lease gets a credit. Adaptation becomes an underwriting checklist. Hedge funds watch river gauges like weather traders. A low-flow forecast in the Ohio becomes a basis play on Gulf grain. A rising salinity profile near Violet whispers about refinery margins. They don't insure, they arbitrage, but their moves inform the banks who do. Volatility in freight futures bleeds into lender risk premiums. Shipping lines bake delays into charters. The invisible hand adds a surcharge for physics. Fintech creeps into the gap. Parametric insurance, payouts on triggers, not damage, appears for ports. If draft at a control point drops below Y feet for Z days, a check lands. Payouts fund dredging or offset demurrage. Premiums aren't cheap, but they beat balance sheet bleeding. A city considers a parametric for chloride. If conductance over threshold persists X days, funds unlock for trucking water and filters. Actuaries smile at triggers. Politicians squirm at the optics of paying for what used to be normal. In the background, the Mississippi River and tributaries budget fights look different. Supplemental appropriations after each event get harder to sell when rating agencies recite the sequence. Markets want predictability. The river offers conditions. The trigger isn't catastrophe, it's repricing. The guarantee that the river wants the Atchafalaya turns into the guarantee that money gets more expensive first. And when money moves, everything else follows. Climate acceleration, higher ceilings, lower floors. 3 days earlier, a minor tropical storm drifted toward the delta while gauges upriver read like a drought report. Not a hurricane, not a headline maker, just enough surge and rain in the wrong sequence. The timing turned routine operations into triage. A city shifted intakes an hour early. A refinery tightened cooling water limits. A pilot bumped a transit to catch a narrow tide. Nothing failed. Everything ran closer to the line. Heavier rain bursts now stack crests faster. In the Ohio and Missouri basins, storms dump in tight windows, pushing sudden rises into channels trained for steadier climbs. The hydrograph spikes, shorter ramp up higher top. Those bursts carry sediment loads that slam into constrictions, forcing velocity to choke and scouring where you least want it. What used to be a week-long rise arrives in days, and the system burns through its safe maneuvers quicker than the paperwork can catch up. Then the other side shows. Longer dry spells widen the troughs. Weeks turn to months with too little discharge to hold the Gulf at bay. Flow settles well below the 300,000 CFS comfort line, and the salt layer slides upriver with less resistance, filling holes like a slow fog at the bottom of the channel. Barges carry less, intakes taste more, and the underwater sill that bought a month last time buys 2 weeks now because the wedge has learned the deeper path we dug for ships. A warmer Gulf lifts the baseline. Surge events begin from a higher platform, and the density contrast at the mouth stiffens the wedge. The salt layer becomes more stubborn, harder to thin, and quicker to reform after a small rise passes. Meanwhile, sea level rise plus subsidence lowers the table the freshwater sits on. The river doesn't need to fall as far for the wedge to reach critical infrastructure. The map of risk expands without the lines moving. Design standards lag reality. The structures and levees were calibrated to histories that smoothed the extremes. Safety factors assumed independence of events, one variable high while others stayed near normal. Compound events erase those assumptions. Low flow meets a coastal surge and a brief thunderstorm squall line, and the result is a brackish push at the same moment dredges are committed to keep the navigation window open. High flow meets a sediment choke, and uplift pressures climb while operators juggle gates that haven't cycled in months. The spreadsheet says redundancy, the river says simultaneity. On the flood side, higher ceilings are more than stage numbers. They're energy. Each additional foot of river against concrete multiplies force on foundations and increases the head across the 70-30 split. The Atchafalaya's pull grows in those moments, carving deeper in its bed and boosting the next flood's attraction. Operators watch vibrations and pore pressures with the memory of 1973 in their ears, knowing a millimeter in the wrong place can turn readings into alarms. On the drought side, lower floors cut into the economy in quiet, relentless ways. Draft advisories become the lingua franca of a season. A pilot's rule of thumb, 1 inch less draft equals hundreds of tons lost, turns into a daily loss ledger. Light loading becomes standard, lightering becomes a business model, and freight rates bake in climate variance as a permanent surcharge. Farmers adjust planting decisions to hedge against storage and river risk, not just price. Refineries rewrite maintenance windows to dodge salinity hours like storms on a radar. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly these shifts would compress maintenance. Windows that used to open for months now crack for weeks, or not at all. The off-season becomes a myth told by schedules that keep slipping. Critical inspections get squeezed, and parts backlogs meet urgency. You can't pour concrete fixes in flood, and you can't dredge everywhere in drought. So you triage, and the river notices. Meanwhile, the salt wedge's return time shortens. Once-a-decade episodes creep toward every few years. Utilities build muscle memory, barge pumps staged, blending protocols rehearsed, but each activation costs. Chloride eats budgets as well as pipes. Insurance notices repeated triggers and prices them as norms. Parishes that never expected to coordinate crossed eyes suddenly share valves and politics because the plume doesn't respect boundaries. Everything was about to change when a storm brushed the bird's foot during a low-flow week. Surge nudged the wedge while wind stacked water at the mouth. Upstream, no relief. The sill held barely after a rapid raise that forced dredges to reshuffle cuts upriver. Ports lost a day and then another half. Hospitals moved dialysis hours earlier for 3 days running. A school district cancelled sports to save bottled water for classrooms. On paper, it was a near miss. On the ground, it was a rehearsal. In the aftermath, design intent looked dated. Freeboards felt thin. Intake elevations that once seemed safe now lived inside the salt map for too many days a year. The Corps scheduled more frequent surveys, cities budgeted for permanent auxiliary intakes, ports stockpiled dredge agreements like spare parts. The language shifted from unprecedented to recurring. The ceiling had climbed, the floor had dropped. The space between held the country's commerce, and the margin inside that space kept shrinking. Alternatives that aren't, diversions, rails, and fantasy fixes. First idea sounds decisive. Accept capture and move with it. If the Mississippi wants the Atchafalaya, let it go. On maps in quiet rooms, planners sketch a migration, ports shift toward Morgan City and Berwick Bay, pipelines regrade to new docks, refineries replumb for different heads, ship channels cut through different mud. It reads like a clean pivot. On the ground, it's a decade-plus upheaval measured in rights-of-way, permits, litigation, and sunk capital that still has bonds to pay. You can't uproot Refinery Alley with a memo. You can't build a deep draft complex in a swamp faster than wetlands law and geotechnics allow. Meanwhile, the old ports still have to run. Then come mega diversions, the seduction of fixing two problems with one concrete mouth. Open the river to the wetlands, rebuild land, and lower flood stages. In a perfect world, you swing wide gates, route sediment into dying marsh, and keep a 50-foot navigation channel trimmed for ships. Here's the rub. What builds land often steals depth. Mud wants to drop where water slows, exactly the opposite of what a ship channel needs. Diversions strong enough to matter can sabotage drafts at the wrong times. You can phase them, aim them, and schedule them, but every cubic yard that settles out of the navigation corridor is a yard you don't dredge later, or a yard you definitely do for a price. Rail and truck look like cavalry until you count wheels and crews. The grain belt already leans on Class I railroads that juggle coal, intermodal, autos, and chemicals. Add a sudden barge shortfall and yards jam. Locomotives aren't idle assets, engineers don't materialize, and sidings don't lengthen on command. Trucks fill the gaps in headlines, but bridges choke, diesel spikes, and 1,040-ton fixes can't substitute for a single 40,000-ton tow. Emissions climb, wear spreads, and rural roads designed for harvest pulses, not sustained freight migration, break under the load. You can move some volume for a season. You can't replace the river's economics with asphalt. So the conversation drifts to canals and backdoors. Could the Yazoo backwater route be widened into a failover? Could the intracoastal become a true parallel? Physics still rules. The Yazoo Delta is flat, water creeps, it doesn't sprint. The intracoastal is a workhorse for tugs and barges, but it isn't a deep draft freeway waiting for bulkers. Cut a new channel and you inherit the same sediment arithmetic. Slow water, drop load, repeat. Every shortcut becomes a maintenance plan with an accent. Here's the thing, redundancy takes time we haven't put on calendars. Staged resilience sounds smart. Build auxiliary intakes now, crossed-eye parishes, preposition barge-mounted pumps, stockpile rock for emergency sills, harden a few upland railheads with grain and fuel capacity, and set up lightering fleets to keep ship windows alive when drafts pinch. All of that buys seasons, not eras. It doesn't solve capture physics. It doesn't erase whiplash droughts. It just stretches the timeline between crises, so decisions can be made on weekdays instead of midnights. Fantasy fixes sneak in as language. Just dredge more ignores that deeper channels ease salt inland during drought. Just raise levees forgets that higher walls perch the river and lift consequences. Just desalinate pretends municipal budgets can drink $1 billion plant built for rare events, then idle it forever. Just reroute pipelines, skips the years of permitting and the reality that pumps don't like their energy maps rewritten. Just move the ports, Sounds brave until a single berth takes a decade and a city to host it. There are practical steps that don't sell themselves with ribbon cuttings. Pay for measurement, more gauges, more salinity profiles, better bathymetry near the hinge points, so operators move from hunch to data. Fund parametric triggers that release money the day draft drops or chloride rises, so local leaders aren't begging for appropriations while the wedge is under their dock. Write honest metrics into bond disclosures: days closed, draft days, salinity miles. You can't manage what you refuse to count. Meanwhile, accept trade-offs in the open. Megadiversions that build land will sometimes narrow drafts. Plan export schedules around windows you can protect, and stop pretending you can maximize both every week of the year. Rail needs crew pipelines and yard capacity years in advance. Pay for them before you need them. Truck corridors need designated surge routes and bridge upgrades. Pick them now, not during a queue. Hardening intakes costs less today than paying insurers a premium for the same risk tomorrow. Pay off every path delays. None erases the guarantee. The river's intent doesn't vanish because spreadsheets got prettier. What changes is who gets breathing room and who does. Staged redundancy, done honestly, buys time for a managed retreat where it makes sense, a strategic fortification where it must, and fewer panicked weeks where hoses cross levees in the dark. It's not a cure. It's a choice to land softer when physics calls in our debts. The people on the line, micro stories. The levee cook wipes steam off a griddle and checks a clipboard covered in river stages. He used to plan orders by headcount. Now he plans by queues. When barges stack 2 miles long, breakfast shifts double. Bacon goes first, then coffee, then patience. He counts tips like fuel, thin on flood weeks, thinner on drought. His daughter needs new cleats. He marks the stage at Baton Rouge and circles Saturday. If the draft advisory tightens, that circle turns into a double. A Plaquemines teacher keeps a tote in the trunk, jugs, lids, a roll of tape. In August, she sent home a flyer about taste and conductivity. In September, she told kids to bring water bottles. In October, she set a timer to fill tubs before the wedge might roll past the intake. She runs a lesson on estuaries and doesn't mention her own sink. When the robocall says, blending today, she switches to dry erase markers because the cheap ones smear with brackish film. A grain merchandiser in Davenport watches storms dodge counties like they've got a grudge. He has 6 farmers on hold and a spreadsheet that says no cars in bold. The river gauge dips another 1/10. He tells one farmer to hold if the bin's safe, tells another to ship to a smaller elevator with an open pit, and buys an expensive rail slot he swore he wouldn't. His bonus used to ride freight rates. Now it rides draft days. A maintenance diver straps on a tank and studies a laminated photo of the low sill. He circles the eddy he felt last time with a grease pencil. Visibility down there is an arm's length on a good day, a hand on a bad one. He counts kicks, listens for the pitch change in flow, and reaches for a seam he knows by touch. The silt moves like breath. He pats the concrete, finds his way back, and taps a signal line twice. Routine becomes careful. Careful becomes a text to his supervisor, feels different. A harbor pilot sits on a stool by a window, flipping through tide tables with a pencil stuck behind his ear. He's got a bulk carrier that needs a foot more than the advisory says is smart. He stacks wind, tide, and a cut he ran yesterday when the sandbar was smaller. He takes the job, times the pass, and tells the bridge, once we line up, we don't stop. The ship clears by inches nobody will ever applaud. He goes home, writes a note in a notebook, bar grew again. The levee cook gets a call from his wife, daycare raised rates. He adds toast to the breakfast plate unasked. He used to joke with deckhands about the river's moods. This year, it's all quiet math. 2 more days of queues, 3 more pallets of eggs, then maybe a lull. If the wedge pushes up again, the hospital will order lunches on short notice, and his Saturday off will evaporate. He smiles anyway because deckhands tip when they haven't slept. From their perspective, every foot of water is a paycheck or a pink slip. The teacher budgets bottled water like supplies. The merchandiser's voice changes when the gauge drops. The diver feels the river through his gloves long before headlines. The pilot gambles for safe margins with a watch, not a roulette wheel. The cook ties family plans to a hydrograph line. Unknown to them, across town, a dialysis nurse moves appointments 30 minutes earlier to dodge salinity peaks. She tapes a note to a machine, check chloride, log every hour. A refinery lab tech switches vials faster when the number creeps toward threshold. He texts his partner he'll be late again. In a parish office, a clerk fields questions about taste and bills from people who don't care about CFS, just coffee. A farmer loads a truck at dusk, not dawn, because the elevator opened a surprise night shift to catch a barge window. His kid sits on the tailgate, kicking boots against the bumper, asking if Halloween will move this year. He says no, then thinks about it and says, "We'll make it work." He means the costume, he means the year. Meanwhile, a deckhand finally gets cell service. He scrolls baby photos, zooms too far and laughs alone. The tow idles. He hears the captain say, "We'll try at first light." He tucks the phone in his pocket, pulls on gloves and grabs the line. The river doesn't care, they do. The political theater and the quiet truth. While the river wrote deadlines in sand and concrete, the podiums wrote a different story. Ribbon cuttings framed new dredges against the skyline. Officials praised emergency sills like moon landings. A line of microphones, a hard hat, a handshake, then a sentence that sounded like certainty.